Published 0333 EDT, the 31st of August 2017. Updated 0413 EDT, the 31st of August 2017. Theresa May today faced an immediate backlash to her vow to fight the 2022 election as a former Tory chairman said it would not be up to her. Grant Shapps demanded Mrs. May deliver as Prime Minister now and warned the party would decide what happens next. Mr. Shapps, who was party chairman during the successful 2015 election, said the Tories' 2017 challenge had been a disastrous failure. He became the first senior Tory to go public with a rebuke to Mrs. May since her surprise declaration last night she wanted to carry on as PM. Grant Shapps' file image today demanded Theresa May deliver as Prime Minister now and warned the party would decide what happens next. Theresa May, pictured today in Japan, has declared she wants to fight the next general election after securing a Brexit deal. The Premier has surprised many in Westminster by surviving the summer since the disastrous election results. Mrs. May called a snap election in the hope of a huge victory only to lose the hard-won Tory majority. Last night in Japan, Mrs. May declared she was not a quitter and signaled her intention to carry on for the long term in defiance of predictions she is a lame duck PM. Mr. Shapps told the BBC Radio 4 Today programme, "I don't think there's an appetite for leadership elections right at this moment." He said the Prime Minister should be judged on her performance in the Brexit negotiations, but it was probably the case that nobody wanted Mrs. May to face Jeremy Corbyn at the ballot box again. He said, "I think colleagues may well be surprised by this interview last night, and I think it is too early to be talking about going on, as Margaret Thatcher once said. Let's get some progress for the British people first. I think that's the priority." Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson issued a surprise statement of support for Mrs. May after her declaration. But many Conservatives will be privately surprised at the move, just weeks before a difficult Tory conference. The Premier, pictured today during a visit to the Japanese helicopter carrier JS Izumo today, has surprised many in Westminster by surviving the summer since the disastrous election results. Mrs. May's trip to Japan included a Japanic business forum pictured as a major trade mission intended to work alongside the Brexit talks. Speaking in Japan, Mrs. May said she was not a quitter and would remain in office to guide the country through Brexit and beyond. Her bold declaration could see her stay in office for another 10 years if the Conservatives win the next election and she serves 2 full terms. Her pledge will shock Westminster after her decision to call a snap election resulted in the humiliating loss of her party's Commons majority. Many had assumed Mrs. May would remain as Prime Minister only until Britain formally left the EU in 2019, before stepping down and handing over to a new leader to fight the next election. Indeed, many MPs believed they had a tacit understanding this would be the case. But as she arrived in Japan yesterday for the start of a 3-day trip, Mrs. May made clear she had no such intention of quitting. Mrs. May told MPs after the election that she got them into the mess and would get them out, but few considered she would continue in number 10 until 2022 and beyond. The PM is currently on a 3-day visit to Japan, her first trip outside Europe since her humiliating election performance. Many Tory MPs believed Mrs. May was standing down ahead of the next election. She dismissed a recent report that suggested she would leave Downing Street in the summer of 2019 following Brexit as having no basis whatsoever. Instead, Mrs. May insisted there was still an awful lot more she wanted to get done to deliver a brighter future for the country. Asked if she intended to lead the Tories into the next election, the Prime Minister said, "Yes. I'm here for the long term and it's crucial. What me and my government are about is not just delivering on Brexit, we are delivering a brighter future for the United Kingdom." Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, pictured yesterday in Nigeria, has issued a surprise statement of support for Mrs. May after her declaration. She added, "I'm in this for the long term because there's a long-term challenge for the United Kingdom." Analysis by John Stevens, deputy political editor, who is traveling with the PM in Japan. Walking through the hills of Snowdonia with her husband Philip at Easter, Theresa May decided she was ready to fight. Less than a year into the job as Prime Minister in April, she made the biggest decision of her political life, calling a snap election so she could win a mandate as leader of the country in her own right. After suffering the humiliation of losing her precious Commons majority, you could forgive Mrs. May for never wanting to return to the place where she chose to gamble and lost. Prime Minister Theresa May, pictured with her husband Philip in Italy in July, decided to continue as Prime Minister while walking through Snowdonia last week, but over the bank holiday, she and her husband were back in the Welsh countryside where she says she gets the opportunity to clear her mind and her thinking. Walking through the churchyard after attending the 18th-century St. Mary's Church in Dolgellau on Sunday morning, Mrs. May knew in her mind she had made another pivotal choice. and soon after taking off from Heathrow on Tuesday evening for a 3-day trip to bolster trade with Japan, Mrs. May shared with reporters her decision, which just weeks ago would have drawn scoffs and derision. But somehow, as she returns from the summer emboldened for a new fight, some are starting to believe she means it when she says she is not a quitter and will take the Tories through the next election in 2022. Many in the ranks had assumed she would lead the country through Brexit, which should be finalised in March 2019, at an absolute maximum. But with Tory MPs scared of the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn, many have come to realise it is better to keep quiet and back Mrs. May instead of going through an ugly leadership contest that would inevitably lead to demands for another election. As the weeks passed, and none of the leadership rumours gained any real traction, Mrs. May slowly rebuilt her team, getting rid of her toxic former advisers, and renewing her Brexit strategy and policy ideas. Her confidence appears to have re-emerged, just in time as she heads to the party's annual conference. Unlike some predecessors, who ran away when things got tough, Mrs. May is not giving up without a fight. We need to get the Brexit deal right, deliver the right deal for the people of the UK, but we also need to ensure that after we have left the European Union, global Britain is out there trading around the world, standing tall. She then declared, "I am not a quitter." Mrs. May's bold plan risks reigniting leadership rows in the Conservative Party ahead of its annual conference in just a few weeks. Most colleagues were willing to accept her remaining in office as they feared a damaging leadership contest that could lead to another election and hand Jeremy Corbyn the keys to Downing Street. But by asserting her desire to cling on for the longer term, Mrs. May could cause rumblings from those with their eyes on the top job, thought to include Mr. Johnson and Brexit Secretary David Davis, and risks the leadership issue bursting into the open over party conference season. It is thought Mrs. May has been emboldened because no one has emerged as a serious contender to take her on. In the days after the election, a contrite Mrs. May told Tory MPs, "I got us into this mess, and I'm going to get us out of it. I will continue to serve as long as you want me." But no serious opponent has emerged, and Brexit-supporting Tory MPs are worried that a change of leader could jeopardise their objectives in negotiations with the EU. Explaining why she thought she should continue, Mrs. May said that while she had promised to get on with the job of Brexit, her vision for her premiership included securing changes domestically on issues such as social justice. Over the summer, Mrs. May said she had reflected on her election disappointment in June, but had decided that people wanted her to continue to deliver Brexit. She said, "Obviously what I have done since the election is reflected on the messages and issues the public felt were important, and that came through. I think coming out of it, the general view I got from the public in relation to Brexit was get on with it, but make sure you get a good deal." Former Tory leader William Hague warned cabinet ministers against plotting to replace Mrs. May as he suggested her successor would be an outsider. Lord Hague said all ministers needed to concentrate on doing a good job in the job they have got now and should not be maneuvering to be a future leader. He told the BBC the ones who maneuver probably will not become the leader, and they should get behind Theresa May and help her to do a good job in these exceptionally difficult circumstances. "When I was elected 20 years ago, a few months before I was elected, I was 661 against at the bookies. The most likely person hardly ever gets it.